Jazz hands. There we go.
Hey.
We're live. What is going on? Good evening, everyone. This is the Melanated Council, back at you on a Tuesday night, and we got our lovely co-host. Point is, I was right the first time. We got the lovely, wonderful Ron and my good friend Carlos. Special guest.
Carlos.
We always love our special guests. A good friend of mine from RPI, where I went to grad school, and we're both engineers. Figured it might be nice to have an engineering perspective because we're talking about zoning. But we're not going to get too crazy into tonight's topic, at least not just yet. Because we always got to start it off the way we always do. Actually, before I do all right. Now, actually, someone else is out here backstage, and we're going to have to give a very special introduction as well to another good friend of mine. From
there
RPI,
you go.
who also is an engineer and is also very well versed in this topic when it comes to infrastructure and the like. Matthew, actually,
hey, what is up? Thanks for the intro.
What's going on? Thank you for being here. Seriously, like, these streams are nothing without our audience, without our guests. We always have ourselves, but we just end up talking to ourselves, which, you know, is fun for a little bit, but it's always much more interesting when we have other people. So, like I was saying about Carlos, Matt's a good friend. We went to RPI in upstate New York. All of us were engineers. And in particular, I'll introduce y'all. Matt did civil engineering. And so that's very pertinent when it comes to infrastructure, literally. That's like a huge focus there. And my man Carlos was industrial management engineering. And there's still a lot that's relevant when it comes to like supply chains, logistics, so many things that honestly he's going to be much better versed than me. But before we get too deep into zoning, which is tonight's topic, we wanted to just make it chill. What's going on with everyone in their lives? How was everyone's weekend / past week? And, you know, let's kind of just kick back for a second. I guess we'll let them go. We'll let them go down. Ron, but it also kind of makes sense. We're going to let the guests go ahead and sort of, you know, clear the air. Say what you want to say. How's it been going?
Yeah, everything's been good.
Good.
Work from home still going on. We're permanently hybrid now, which is awesome.
Awesome. That's pretty dope. And you, Carlos? I know we kind of talk there, but for the folks, what's been going on in your sphere, or any cool things you recently did this weekend, or anything?
Nah, for sure. I mean, life has been good. I work at a manufacturing plant, so we've been on site in person day in, day out. You know, that's always a lot to go on, always a lot going on. Never a dull day. But so far so good, you know, thankfully using the highway systems, pretty much commuting every day. So it's definitely an interesting perspective on how we get around.
Absolutely, for sure. And that's interesting too, you know, fully remote versus actually commuting, and also in like a pretty large area, one of the larger cities. So traffic is a very real consideration there. And for you, Matt, it sounds like you're remote, but I'm guessing you still live like...
Yeah, I live an hour from the office.
Okay.
So I'm loving this remote stuff.
Yeah, an hour would not be it. I guess I can't be. I have to be a little. I can't complain too much because I'm like in 20 minutes. Well, coming back, traffic is always so bad. It's closer to 30, but that's still not that bad. I can get there in like 16 minutes. Get home probably in 25. But that's not too bad at all. As for me and myself, well, for those who've been able to follow me on Snapchat, because that's the only place I've been posting this craziness, is I've had some issues with my apartment, and so I've been having construction work. I would say more like reconstruction, just there was a lot going on. A lot of environmental things that were not good with plumbing and sewage, really nasty, like coming up out of my pipes, I should say my toilet and tub. So it was like literally environmental health hazard type stuff. And I've kind of had no choice but to be here. Didn't get moved to another apartment. So I was dealing with that pretty much all of last week. Monday, literally. Weekend, but starting Monday. And the actual work of like rebuilding stuff just started today. The demolition of like the wall and the floor started like midweek, like probably Wednesday last week. So just waiting on the contract. I mean, they've been doing good work since honestly today. So I think by tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, everything should be like new. But they still have to clean the mess. Like they drained the water out of like the tub and the toilet, but there's still just like crap, literally, that you can still see lining the tub. So I've literally not used my own bathroom in like over a week. So not fun, but I live in a 2-bed, 2-bath. So my roommate, we've been able to kind of work out things to be able to, so I can actually use that. But in terms of like other stuff, just did little things here and there. Hit the beach for an event. That was cool last Friday. Just did some other stuff Saturday, Sunday. Honestly, it's a little bit hazy just because of how crazy everything was, but I'm looking forward to a better start or a better finish to this week than last week. But yeah, and Ron, the legendary Ron.
Yes. Let's see. My weekend went by like a blur. I'm actually trying to remember and recall what I did. Let's see. Friday. What did I do Friday? Friday, I think I just chilled, relaxed. Got caught up in some anime. Kiriko's basketball. So that was really good. Finished that. And I finished the anime Saturday or Sunday. Finished the anime on that. Really good, really good. Especially if you're a person that likes sports and anime, that's a good one to watch. Let's see. Saturday was doing yard work around not only my house, but my two neighbors' house. One of my neighbors, he had cut the front part of my yard. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and basically weed eat around the side of my house. And then he was also doing my neighbor's house on the other side of me. So I did it the side of his house. And then another neighbor was cutting his backyard. So I'm like, okay, cool, great. He's getting your backyard. So I'm just going to go ahead and weed eat around the fencing, around the house, around the car. So call it good and great. And let's see, Saturday evening, what did I do Saturday evening? I think it just chilled. It was kind of hot, kind of muggy. Really didn't do a whole lot. Saturday night, Sunday pretty much just chilled, kick back, relax. Been trying to finish off this Resident Evil series that's on Netflix. It's really good. Really good. I got I'm like 2 episodes away from the end. And so far I can say if anybody is a Resident Evil fan, whether you like the movies, the video games, the kind of like the animated movies, I think what Netflix did was take Resident Evil as a series and just kind of put it up there. So it's really good. I like the storyline. I like the way how they created the creatures, especially if anybody knows who the hunters are. If y'all know about them, oh yeah, they did them some justice. And yeah, it's a really good story. Really, really causes you to think a whole lot. So I'm gonna try to finish that series sometime this week. I think, I don't know, but that's that. And also just getting my mind right. as far as not only the kids going back to school, but also me going back to school as well, as far as my role goes within my community. So preparing for that as well. And oh, that's what I did Saturday. So my daughter, her friend had a birthday party, so I went over there. Her mom, I worked with. She was the principal at my kids' school, so hung out with them, and we sat around, we talked with her husband and everything else. And so it was a good time. I haven't seen them since school ended, and so it was cool to see them again. It was cool to see all of the the small bunch of the fifth grade girls that my daughter hung out with during school. Saw them all over again. It was cool, making sure they were doing good and great. So they're ready for middle school, getting the kids ready for sports. So football, football, and I think cross country. I think I don't know. Too many keep up, but that's what's going on with that area of the woods. So come fall time, I'm going to be busy, busy, busy. Oh, that's it. Also, my family just got to talk to my family the other day. We're planning a family reunion trip to go to DC next week. So if anybody is in the DC area, I'm coming to see you. Whoever y'all are, I'm coming to see y'all in DC. So once I get everything squared away, figure out where I'm going to be at, I will let y'all know. I want to see y'all. So yes, I can't wait. And yeah, that's it. That's it for me. That is it for me.
Dope. Awesome. And that is, might be biased, but the DC area is pretty dope. So hope you enjoy.
Nice.
Agreed.
Exactly. So now the topic at hand. Also, we don't have our lovely co-host Elle today. Definitely missing her, but definitely be back next week. Just wanted to give her a shout out.
Yes.
And so tonight's topic, zoning, rounds out what we've been doing this whole month, talking about infrastructure, transportation, kind of a general overview the first week, just kind of talking about various modes of transportation and kind of like how things are now during COVID, some of the history, and various disparities that you have in certain communities not having as good access to some of this infrastructure. Our second week was, a glad to see you hanging out with us here. Then we were talking about Roe v. Wade, and transportation and infrastructure, and how there's a very direct sort of link between the overturning of Roe v. Wade and then, how is that going to affect, or how are people who need to travel, for instance, to get medical procedures affected? And, obviously we have a lot of issues with our infrastructure currently, whether it's the overburdens of flights and things being canceled, whether it's just the lack of public transportation that does definitely not exist, when you want to go between a lot of areas like high-speed rail and that type of thing. And so that was a very good conversation, and obviously, we were able to get a very diverse perspective. And then last week we talked about electric vehicles and sort of like, is that going to be something that sort of is the future? Will that save us from our current crises? Whether you're talking about the gas prices or just the climate. And so we had a little bit of split of opinion, but also some unity, and that was pretty cool. And so now we bring it back to zoning, which really gets very local, because that's literally like, how are resources distributed within different communities? Zones determine where you go to school, determine, the districts and like the representatives and how things are built, zoning regulations, and housing is a very big topic as well. And so I just figured, we could talk about zoning, and that ties into public transportation very heavily, as well as urban planning and how people choose to build some of these cities. Now, of course, a lot of cities, we're already in 2022, so it's more about new development. But I figured we can get, everyone's perspective, especially our guests, because engineers, I know they have their kind of perspective on this. And so, and we have different parts of the country that we all lived in. And so we can kind of bring our own unique upbringings into like how we notice things have been developed, like different zones and different neighborhoods, like how has everything kind of come around. So I guess on my end, and I won't be like too long with, I grew up in Maryland, suburban, super suburban. Didn't really get used to taking public transportation, and so I never really even knew like about zoning except when I was going to high school, because you have the school bus pick you up, right? And that's something I took for granted. Like originally, I lived walking distance in elementary school, and then in middle school, I started taking the bus, and so I knew about like zoning just because of like what zone that you have your school in. But I never kind of thought about the back end decisions, like the politics behind it, what kind of dynamics there were at play, and like carving up these areas. And I don't live in Boston now, but I live like 20 minutes, and I kind of hear about different zones, and there's always big fights over like, can you build new housing and all these other things. And so it's not something I'm an expert on at all, but I figured it was an interesting conversation because it gets very local and very close to home, and kind of takes away some of the abstraction of like all these things about electric vehicles or whatever. Because yeah, we live in the zone. So what are y'all's thoughts? I know that was kind of a lot of things, but feel free to kind of play off anything or bring up anything. That's for you two.
Sorry. Oh, what did you say there?
I was just saying, like, what are y'all's thoughts when it comes to like zoning and kind of like how that affects, I guess, everything? Or what's your opinion on zoning for those of you who are a little more well versed in it, or maybe have followed up your local zoning regs or anything? I was just kind of curious your take.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like especially in Long Island, we're known as like one of the most segregated areas, if not the most segregated counties in the country. So like it's interesting. A lot of zones are divided by highways, uh, which were, they it's a way it's like permanent infrastructure that can divide people by race when you really look at it. Like where my office is, it's like a predominantly white community, and just a mile to the west, crossing a highway, it's predominantly African American, and it's same types of streets, same houses. It's just you have highways, streets dividing sectors of people, and it's kind of interesting to see and see how those you know how those separate that segregation persists into today.
That's fair.
And yeah, and that makes sense. But I forget what the name of the architect that did Manhattan and then also did most of Long Island. I think it's
Robert Moses.
Yep, Robert Moses. Where I mean, one thing I remember hearing a lot, and kind of a pinpoint, was there's a reason why the bridges on Long Island across the highways are a certain height, and it was to prevent buses being able to go under the bridges, so that way people from Brooklyn, people from Queens wouldn't be able to use public transportation to get all the way across Long Island. So kind of like how you said, it's interesting how even within infrastructure, you can delineate or almost even divide neighborhoods, and by that you can divide culture, society, just humanity as a whole, just by putting in the infrastructure in a certain way.
Yeah, and this is something I've been seeing, like, people talk about for sure. Like, I always remember hearing that big, infamous example of someone, I just forgot the name you said, but like, yeah, you build these bridges a certain way, and that's something that I never knew, growing up, high school, even really college. And so it's just like, wait a second, this is just something that just happened, and like blindsided everybody. Like people, like very real people were affected by it, by some probably nonsense technical BS explanation of why we're building this way, but then like there's alternative motives, and so yeah, it's kind of crazy. But at least like once you know, you can kind of shape things to hopefully be better. Particularly getting people in power, or just like the people who are doing these contracts and making sure they have the interests of different communities at heart, and not just whoever you're trying to serve, who have less than wholesome intentions. I know, like, see, like, even like outside of bus heights, like bridge heights and everything, I just knew that like it was sometimes not very easy to access. Like, you know, there's areas that are really meant for like car riders, right? Um, there for certain neighborhoods and suburbs where really you have to have a car, and you're not going to be able to like get in certain places very easily by bus. And so you're already kind of like, I mean, if those places already have high property values, and obviously you're priced out just by living there. But then even by like getting around, you're not going to be able to easily go ahead and like live in certain areas, especially if they're gated communities or like other communities, because how are you going to get there if bus routes don't go? They'll go into the city center. You might be able to get into some like inner city areas, right? Like in Boston, I know there's some like majority black neighborhoods that do have um, bus routes. And credit to Mayor Wu, who won her election. She's pretty progressive, Green New Deal and everything. And I love how like she kind of takes away those abstractions and puts it really into like city planning. And this actually wasn't something I thought of like explicitly beforehand, but it makes sense with the topic because she wanted to like make certain lines free in like Dorchester, Roxbury, these majority black areas or black and brown areas. And so hopefully that would like, help alleviate poverty. Also trying to transition these buses to like electric, which goes into last week's topic. So that way you have cleaner emissions, on these like high density modes of transportation. And so that's how you kind of like actually try to connect different people and give people access instead of like shutting them out where it's like, oh, you're here, well, screw you. You can't get around. If you can't get around, your resources just go way down, getting jobs, anything, even participation in like city government and just other stuff, because you kind of are relegated to this corner, this like little community, and you're divided.
Yeah, I mean, and going back to the example with New York, just by looking at the history and looking at the way the streets are laid out, you can kind of almost tell who used to live where, and kind of looking at it from the zoning, the infrastructure, the streets and the traffic, they show who and what used to live there, right? Like what streets are now used as main subway routes. What avenues got turned into highways. So in kind of seeing not just how humanity and how society and ultimately city governments change the surroundings, but also kind of how the inverse, right? How who lives there affects how you get around.
Mm. That's true. Demographics are destiny. I mean, that's used a little more tongue in cheek, but unfortunately, like, if you have certain concerns, like certain people, and they help shape the policy or shape whatever, and then it locks out anyone else, until you kind of have like an equal voice from everyone and like developing transportation and like zoning policy. Um, and yes, exactly what is being said. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, no, just the entire backstory, like the history of Robert Moses and what, he's starting out as like I think he was on the architecture team that ended up doing Prospect Park, and I might be wrong, I think Central Park as well in New York City, and then how he goes and rises up into, the main architect that gets the contract to plan out the expansion of Long Island, and just the decisions this guy and his firm makes are wild. So if you're really interested in, like, because I see the chat is really curious about the deliberate, bridge height comment. If that piques your interest, definitely look into, the history and Robert Moses and how architecture can affect, how 50, 60, maybe even 100 years later, people are just now moving into these neighborhoods where their families could afford it 60 years ago, but they never had access to it.
Yeah. And that's the crazy thing too. We talk a lot about like, generational wealth, that's come up in various streams and just conversations at large. And it's like, that's actually something I never even really considered as much. Usually it was like, okay, you have bad like housing, like loans being denied by the banks, and you have redlining and all these things. But like the actual like blocking of people physically being able to even get into those neighborhoods is like just another level of it that's crazy.
Yep.
And it's good that it's coming to light, but it's like, yeah, damage is done. And so now you have people being able to kind of get in and hopefully navigate it. But it's not always easy. And I think that something that's even related to is like kind of like with redlining, where you decide like banks are not going to like loan to certain people based on whatever zone or whatever they live in. You also have like a lot of the housing discrimination that's happened. And I've heard people give stories and their personal stories where it's like, you're in this neighborhood, and so we're just gonna like devalue your house, or you're in a neighborhood, but because essentially you're black, like they'll never say it, but you can kind of see almost, pretty scientifically, like, let's have this house, let's get it appraised, and then the appraisal comes out to be some kind of ridiculously low amount, and then when you kind of white it up, it ends up being good. And so you have like that's like interior. But then you also have like outside, like where you are, people might just be like, oh, well, we're just gonna not give you the essentially the value
benefit of, yeah.
And that's crazy. Like that's really crazy. But I think like all of this like zoning and stuff is like, it's something that I don't look up all the time a lot, but it's something I think for me, and this is something that I kind of admitted on earlier streams here this month, is that I've moved around. So I've not been in one place long enough to really like understand like, oh, what zone am I in? Because I'm not buying houses. And then with renting, I mean, whatever. I find a place probably in a town that's neighboring me and move there, right? So it's not like I've really gotten to know anything. And a lot of times people don't know anything, especially people who are moving, like transplants like us. Even people who may be from an area, but like once you kind of become an adult, you were probably blind to a lot of those kind of legalese and like all the kind of wonky things, and then but you kind of have to be hip to it because it affects all the decisions with housing, with loans, and just various things. Like even if you're going to own a vehicle, there's pretty drastic changes in some towns versus others. So it's something that I want to think of more, but your boy doesn't have a car anymore, so that also doesn't help. But and I don't live in a place where you can really transit.
Yeah, no, deed restrictions. That's another discussion. That's a discussion for maybe even an entire other stream. Because that just the history of why deed restrictions became popular in the South and the West in the 70s and the 60s, and then why deed restrictions became just these wild measures to keep things or keep a certain image of a neighborhood intact. And like Chad said in the chat, it's unfortunately it's still very much alive and very much still in play to this day.
Jeez, that's actually something Go ahead. You can go ahead,
Matt. Will you say something?
Oh, I thought you were. But since we're talking about housing, I think this is relevant. I firsthand believe I was a victim of appraisal discrimination. I became a homeowner February last year and refied in September last year. Thanks. And when I did my appraisal, the appraiser, which was the same appraiser who appraised the house when when the previous owner had it, they stated, basically the value only went up 4.8%, when like the average of Long Island went up about 18, and the national average was like 15 or 12%. So like I actually wrote them a 5-page paper, got a new appraisal, but I had my dad stand in as the homeowner. He's mixed. Appraisal went up by 10 grand, which still was not where it should be. But yeah, that whole idea of whitewashing, I'm pretty sure if I was able to do that, it would have definitely raised the value. But it's awful to see things like that still happening today.
Most definitely.
Man, that's nice.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
And at least the nice part about appraisal, or just how real estate works nowadays, I think you can ask for the property to be reappraised as early as 3 years. I think, or at least in Texas, I think you can ask for a new value within 3 years. It might be 5 years in New York. I'd have to double check that, but at the very least, you can, because I know, or at least in Texas, with appraisals, they have to give you feedback. They have to say, oh, these were the things that could have given you more value, but still hasn't, or whatnot. So if you do have that feedback, then it would help you to reappraise it or even appeal the appraising value later on. Say, hey, these things were fixed. You should now therefore increase the value by whatever amount.
Right. Oh, and the other odd thing, so like they have like an assessment. They tell you, like where you live, your zip code, and like some minor things on conditions and whatnot. And I noticed they put the zip code of a town that was majority minority. It's a few miles from my town, and they put a wrong street address. It was a whole bunch of stuff basically to show I lived on like a side of in a town that was more minority. And I pointed it out, and the appraiser was like dumbfounded, and but I'm glad I got a new appraisal. But hopefully things improve.
Hopefully, definitely.
Good for you too for calling it out. Like,
Definitely.
yo, what's going on here? It's that self advocacy thing. Like, that's a work in progress for me too. But like, people will get away with things, or even if it's like implicit, the person, like, they might not even been like they may just have kind of like been going through some motions, but it's so ingrained that like you end up having this kind of bias, right? Or you end up like devaluing because of you're in this area, you're from this. So that's the other thing, is like a lot of it's baked in. I don't know as much as I would like to know when it comes to like that whole concept, because I've never owned, and like I've never really picked my parents' brands or like my friends who own houses. Like a lot of friends, I mean, I know, Matt, you did mention it before, like when I don't remember when it was some months ago, and you were telling me about your experience.
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember like I think because we had a topic actually that was relevant to this thing. It was probably sometime last year, because I don't imagine it was something this year. But there was some topic about Black home ownership, and kind of like, is this disparity something that you think is widespread, yada yada. And I remember you gave your piece, and I was like, damn, I didn't even know. And so I have to kind of tap in more to like hear these experiences and kind of like see how to navigate that sphere, because I mean the market's crazy, like really crazy, and I'm not looking to like buy a house right now, but it is something interesting where it's like, if I'm going to be spending a lot of money, maybe it's worth trying to own, but then I have to do it smartly and be able to actually kind of get that equity out of it, and not get like shortchanged and lowballed for anything.
Agreed. Definitely agreed. And even then, you want to um, be sure that the home that you're going to buy, that if everything is already up to code, because the one thing you don't want to do is mess around, buy a house only to find out that your foundation sucks, or that there's some stuff on the inside of the house that needs to get gutted out and replaced. Or another big one, which my stepdad has to do, is the roof. Make sure that the roof is actually in good shape. or not, because again, that's another expense as a future homeowner that you're going to have to pay out over time because it's going to happen. But look for those signs, look for a lot of the things that to you may be a minor thing, but those minor things could very well turn into something major. I
Oh,
mean,
it's going to add up in the long run.
oh yeah. I mean, case in point, my brother, he messed around and bought his house, but it was the house that he was renting out, and he knew that there was some work that needed to be done to the house beforehand. When he was renting, he was telling his landlord like, "This is what's going on," blah blah blah. So he turned around and bought it. The moment he bought it, he didn't realize like how much work he actually needed to put into his house because the house was in need of a big update, a huge update. Luckily enough for him, he was able to get his bathroom remodeled at a very decent price. He was able to redo his kitchen at a fairly decent price, and he was also able to I think get the gutters fixed and replaced so that way it would still be good if he wanted to sell it again. But he was also saying that he knows he may have to look at the roof and see if his roof needs to get changed out or if it's fine the way how it is. I know the basement area. I know he was talking about how that needs to get updated because that's a little minor thing that's going on in there. But he was like, man, he's like, if I would have known now what I known back then, he said I wouldn't have bought it. I would have went ahead and either one built me a house because it's cheaper to go ahead and get it built depending upon the company. And then in or two, I would have bought a bigger house within the same area at a better price. Like so he pretty much told me, he's like, he's like, dude, if you're getting ready to go house hunting, he's like, make sure you either do one of those two things and do it the right way. I'm like, cool, fair enough.
And then also, I guess, going back to the zoning topic, another big thing that, if you're going into house hunting and figuring that stuff out, is actually the zone that the house is in. And that's schooling, that's taxes, that's state, local, and federal districts, and figuring out, okay, where, in here in Houston, and I guess, well, actually, no, that wouldn't be up north, but floodplains. What's the chance that a decent rain is going to flash flood the street, or if you get snowed in, right? Where does the snow usually end up? On the end of the street. So, I mean, those things are also part of what goes into looking into getting a new property.
Yes. Oh, agreed. Definitely agreed. And especially when it comes to the flood, like the house that I am renting out right now. Some years ago, the street that we live on actually got flooded. There's a river right behind us where if there's enough rainfall, all that river water comes up and it floods the basement. And so my neighbor's house across the street, my neighbor on my right side, and the neighbor on the left-hand side, they've been told that their house is within a high-risk flood area. And so I'm like, okay, so like, what about our houses? Can do I need to go and get renter's insurance? And so I called renter's insurance, just doing some price quotes and whatnot, and they told me like, well, you should be agreed. I agree.
Yep.
And they said that, yeah, you should go ahead and get renter's insurance because you live in a high flood area. I'm like, are you serious? They're like, yeah. Like, did you not know that? Like, no. Like, I talked to my landlord. My landlord said that our house is not a part of that high flood area, but there's been times where we get a good amount of rainfall. I can stand on my back porch and I can see the river water come like to the fence line of my neighbor. Oh yeah, of my neighbor's backyard. And his yard is huge. So if it starts creeping up past his fence line, I know it's only a matter of time before it starts making its way up towards our house. But
Yep.
again, his house is in that high flood area. My neighbor's house across the street from me is in that high flood area. But for whatever reason, this house got skipped. I talked to my landlord, did you know about this? He said, no. I was like, you might want to get that checked out because everybody else that's around us is in that high flood zone. I do believe that your house may be in that flood zone as well. So it's worth something to look into. So that's another thing as well. Like, be sure, like, if you live in it, if you're looking at living in the area, make sure it's not in a high flood zone, because if it is, best believe it's going to cost, especially if you don't get insurance, it's going to cost you big time.
Oh yeah. And
Yeah,
water
flood
damage is one of
insurance
those
is
things.
a big cost per year. Could be like
Mm-hmm.
extra few thousand, depending on the degree of the flood zone.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah, and
Chad brings up a good point about municipal services. In Long Island, a lot of communities have cesspools, and those, first of all, are a big expense when you have to empty them. But just having a actual sewer system in your community does increase property value, and you save money on not having to maintain a cesspool. So yeah, good point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's see, Carlos, you want to say something?
nah, I'm good. I'm good.
You good? Okay. Okay. Cool. 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 And it's funny, how like we were talking about doing zoning, because I was telling Toby and I was telling L that I want to be in a position to build my first home.
Yeah.
And I know that the city that we live in, it has a lot of land available. And so, with that being said, a lot of the land nobody's been touched, it's been sitting on the market for like years on end. But the crazy thing about it is the zoning laws for that area, they haven't been updated since 1950. It has not been updated since the 1950s. And so they're still saying that you can't build certain houses, or you can't build certain types of homes, or you can't build certain types of structures in these zones. And if you do, you need to get a special permit. This is that and the third. And so my question to both you and Carlos, well, I have you guys, like, does your cities have that kind of like a zoning law put in place? And if so, when was the last time it's been revised? If that's something that you guys know about.
Um, well, I know there's like special building, codes in certain communities. I don't
Mm-hmm.
hear about them being changed. So yeah, they'd probably, be the same as they were 50 years ago.
Yeah, New York is pretty good about keeping uh pretty similar, if not maintaining the same code for fairly long periods of time. But that being said, because they don't change the codes a lot, what they will do is
Mm-hmm.
they'll do add-ons. So they'll do amendments to the code. So, but they're from my experience, New York is really good at defining what the difference between different types of residential areas. If it's a mixed residential and business, there's like 50 different categories for what that could mean, and the different degrees of either residential or business or
Mm-hmm.
both. Um, where I live down here in Houston, we are fairly known for having a lot of mixed, if not just no zoning at all. So there are very few neighborhoods or wards in Houston that actually have a strict zoning regulation. What that causes, though, is that there are pockets of Houston that are only residential, and then there's pockets of Houston where it's like house, manufacturing site, house, warehouse, restaurant.
Wow.
Like it, so you just get this completely mixed and different. Uh, so you get these completely different neighborhood structures where, what does it mean by, you're waking up, you're waiting for the bus, but there's a line of 18 wheelers that's blocking traffic on a two-way street. Like that. So, and that happens a lot.
Wow. That's crazy. That's crazy. And you bring up an actually good point because I know we were talking about what was it? Was it last episode or the episode before that? How we were discussing improving the way how people get around, especially when it came to the infrastructure piece. Like, what would be the most fastest and cheapest way to make our infrastructure more um, I'm gonna just say this word, I don't know if it's a real word or not, more commutable to get around.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were discussing ideas and brainstorming and throwing little bits and pieces out. And I think what you're saying is absolutely true. Well, yeah, it's true, but at the same time, it's hurtful because now it's like, okay, like you said, you're waiting for the bus and you got to get to work, but you can't get to work because you got all these 18 wheelers pretty much blocking traffic or slowing down traffic. So now you almost, in a sense, have to wake up earlier enough to catch the bus to get to work on time, and hopefully you bypass the huge traffic hiccup in your area. So I think that having some type of zoning code should be established and make it easier for everybody. Definitely make it easier for everybody.
And that is definitely an argument in favor of it, right? Where you say, okay, we don't want this type of thing to happen, so we're going to define these areas as strictly this or strictly that. Another irony, another thing that I did want to bring up is I know here in Houston we're having it's a very conscientious public debate where should we expand highways to quote unquote alleviate big traffic jams, but in the process of increasing the amount of highway lanes that these highways have, that these
Mm-hmm.
major lanes of traffic already exist, you're taking away half, three-quarters worth of neighborhoods. So it's like how much people in neighborhood and public land displacement is worth
Mm.
increasing the traffic. So then the public debate, and I think they even the people that are protesting have managed to appeal it through TxDOT all the way through the National Department of Transportation, where they've managed to, I think they're in the process of reevaluating the expansion of I-45, which goes straight north to south through Houston, where TxDOT is trying to argue we need at least 5 more lanes both ways. And the people in the city of Houston is saying, well, wait a second, because that's, I, I, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. That's at least 300,000 people. That's at least this amount of cars. That's at least this this, that, and the other. And again, the question is, by eminent domain, is that per people in that land displacement worth the throughput that you're going to get supposedly through traffic? And and I know, Matthew, you could definitely speak to this through highways and the civil engineering part, but most studies that look through at traffic have shown, even at the very, even through on the logistics side, increasing the lanes on a highway
Exactly. Makes it
doesn't
worse.
makes it worse. That's the problem.
Literally, yeah.
Because by increasing the amount of lanes, more people think, oh, then now there won't be a traffic jam, so I'm gonna actually use the highway now. So now you have more people on an already congested highway, making it a traffic jam worse instead of making it clear how they thought it would. So the irony is you actually decrease traffic by making the highways smaller.
Yeah,
But kind
there
of
was a
reminds
study I saw. It's like when you go from 2 to 3 lanes, you improve flow, but going from three, anything past three is going to increase, increase traffic. Build it and they will come.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
so interesting.
I no, I get it. I get it because I know here in Michigan, the main highway, I think it's 94. When you when you get up into the Kalamazoo, when you get into the Kalamazoo area, and yes, everybody, that's a real city. It's a real city called Kalamazoo. That's where Derek G is
Yeah.
from. He graduated from Kalamazoo Central. But once you get into the Kalamazoo area, typically it goes from a 2 lane highway to a 3 lane highway. And once you get past Kalamazoo, going towards Battle Creek, it shrinks back down to a 2 lane. Once you get past Battle Creek and you start heading towards more so closer to Detroit, what it used to be was a 2 way, it was a 2 lane, then they increased it to a 3 lane. At the same time, in that section between Jackson and Detroit, they've always had to redo that stretch of highway. We got Henry
What? I did not know this was a thing.
Texas got some wild ass names. I think we got hit and run Texas. I think that's one. Or cut and run. So nah.
Oh yeah. And so in that stretch, it's like pothole city. Like you swerve, you may miss one, but you're gonna smash it to like at least 3, 4 more. And so they've always constantly been work on that stretch of highway. And so now what they're doing now is that stretch of highway between Kalamazoo going on towards Battle Creek, they're not only expanding it a little bit, but they're also fixing up a lot of those pothole damages that's been pretty much left undone since I was a kid. And so that's about 20, 30 plus years ago. And even then, with that stretch of highway between Jackson going towards Detroit, like I said before, they've always been working on it. It almost seems like they could never get that stretch of highway fixed. But once they do get it fixed, it's like, man, what have you guys really done? Because it doesn't seem like you've done a whole lot of work. It's just like you just slap the band-aid over and say, hey, here you go. Have a good old time. Just make sure you watch out for that pothole. So I find it very interesting to hear from different places, like what's going on around your different neck of the woods. It also gives me a little bit of a better perspective because I think when we talk about infrastructure, when we talk about community, when we talk about making things better, a lot of times we forget to mention the people who kind of get affected by it, by those big major changes. So kudos to the people down in Houston for speaking up and speaking out and just letting folks know, like, hey, you just can't do this and think it's okay because you're cutting to the livelihood of a lot of people that live here. A lot of people that live here.
And the crazy part was, I think, in what kind of brought the national attention to that debate was that the protesters had gotten the letter from the National Department of Transportation telling TxDOT, hey, keep it on a pause. We're going back to the drawing board with this one. Let's reconsider. And TxDOT
Right.
kept trying to buy the land, trying to buy the properties, trying to buy the condo buildings near I-45. They try and continue regardless. So that was
Wow.
the crazy part. And I haven't kept up with it, but it's the Stop TxDOT or Stop I-45 TxDOT protest movement. So if you're curious and want to look into that and show support, by all means.
Oh
It's
yeah,
been,
definitely
it's
got to
been
look
an,
definitely look that out.
Yeah, it's been an interesting debate, just kind of looking at,
Mhm.
fourth largest city. We're always about 250,000 below Chicago in people, always showing 10% at least of people coming in from
Mhm.
transplants from from other cities, other parts of the nation, and we still have these traffic issues. It's like, and Houston's known for the sprawl, right? I remember joking in college, saying I could fit in the what is known as the greater Houston area. I could fit Manhattan, Boston, and all these other major cities in this square footage in what is considered Houston proper, just
Mm.
the sheer square mileage. Um, but even then, right? Even then, there are still traffic jams that are hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours long to try and get in and out of the city. And it's what do you do?
Sheesh. Dig a tunnel.
That's crazy.
Dig a tunnel. Dig a tunnel.
Bruh, it's all marshland though. It's all
Ooh,
marshland
you
and
got a
swamp.
point.
We don't got
Mm.
yeah, we don't got what is the word? I mean, we mentioned it. You talked about it earlier in the stream. Basements. We don't got basements down here.
Ooh.
It's marshland. Like
Mm.
I got the bayou right, two blocks down. So I can definitely relate to you with the river. I got the Buffalo
Oh, wow.
Bayou right behind me. And for those of you that remember
Mm.
Harvey,
Okay.
that thing swelled up to about, usually it's at 10 feet deep. That thing swelled up to 25 feet high. It it flooded.
Sheesh.
It flooded highways. It flooded. I had it at my doorstep back in 2017.
Oh, wow.
Shit.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, now it was definitely interesting. And actually, this is actually slightly related. Ways and the way they've coded their most efficient route um, algorithm is based off of what has worked in the past. So if they can track the metadata of people going through um, people going through these roads, then they say, "Oh, this is still good." I remember during Harvey, the roads were flooded and people were driving into the water because they thought, "Oh, Waze said this is good," but Waze took like 48 hours to update from all the floods, so people were literally just trying to get to work, flying through straight into like 6 feet of water.
Wow.
So I remember like walking around the neighborhood and like there's people up with like cardboard signs like, "Hey, if Waze told you to go through here, you turn and get your ass back out of here because you're about to drive into water."
That's crazy.
Wow. That's crazy. That's nuts.
Yep.
You said it was Waze?
Yep, it was Waze.
Wow. Come on, Waze. Y'all got to do better than that. Sheesh.
It
And
really
I think
sounds
you
like.
crazy about. Go ahead,
No,
Toby.
I was just gonna say it really sounds like they got a ways to go.
Yeah, yes, they did. At that point in time, yes, they did. Pun is definitely intended. Puns are welcome here. Puns are always welcome here.
Kombucha, not even not even
Oh,
real
man.
alcohol. I just got this blueberry mint kombucha, but still.
There you go.
No,
But
that's funny.
Ron, you're about to go ahead though and say.
Mm.
Nah, facts. That is true. I forget the data. I forget the data that came out after, back in 2017 after Harvey. But no, you're right. It was a good, yeah, at least 5 million in water damage from cars, just that got stuck in the water somehow.
Mm.
Wow.
I believe it. I believe it.
The flood to
I
wipe out
definitely
the
believe it.
cars. It's a sign.
What'd you say, Toby?
I said the great flood to wipe out the cars. It's a sign. Chad to be happy about that. We gotta somehow reconstruct all of that. Those I don't remember the loops what they're called in Houston again. Like there's like the inner, the outer, and there's like at this point there's like a third one, and it's just reconstructed into some rails. I mean, obviously it's.
I mean, hey, I'm a big proponent of high-speed rail. You know, I remember seeing like that map of the U.S. and how it could look on a high-speed rail map, where it would take 8 hours, I want to say, to go from Houston to New York City.
That's
And
not bad.
you'd basically go up the coast. So you would follow basically I-10 to Florida, and then you would go up the coast up. I think, what is that? 85, I-95 that goes from Florida up to New York. So then, like literally, I think it was half hour from Houston to New Orleans, and then an hour and a half from New Orleans to Atlanta, and then I think the next stop was like Atlanta to Tallahassee, and then up the eastern coast. And then like you basically you basically go I-10 for the south, I-90 for north, and then you basically just follow what the highway system is. You know, I-35 all the way up from Texas up to North Dakota, and then you start connecting the Midwest through the Ozarks down to Atlanta and all that.
Yeah, I've not actually looked into how high speed rail is supposed to go, but that's like actually really interesting. And that's something I'm gonna have to do more research on. Were you about to say something, Matt?
Well, I was thinking. So high speed rail, it works best in areas with enough density, but I definitely could see, where it could help, connect like metro areas, but the most demand would be like within like a megapolis, which is like multiple metro areas that are not that far apart. So like Europe has like perfect density for that. That's where high speed rail is more viable, and parts of a lot of China.
I agree.
So then, I guess, Matt, here's a question for you: how do we measure that density? So, say, like, how do you find that optimum density between the cities, between your metropolitan zones, in order to justify it being a Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks for the beer. This is about 5 years in the making, so I appreciate it. What was I going to say? But yeah, how do you measure that density between metropolitan zones in order to justify rail?
Well, I would think looking at demand, where vehicle traffic, vehicle and existing train demands, like those high demand routes, and just streamline it where you can uh, minimize the amount of cars on the road, maximize flow between rail and vehicles. So looking at demand is probably a way to define the density requirements.
Remember when I said puns are always welcomed?
Yep.
There you go.
We got it. We asked for it. We asked. Shout out for the chat.
Yeah.
Again, Mish comes with them. Mish comes with them. Every episode, there's at least one pun to be made. At least one. And by the time the episode ends, we have at least 5. At least 5.
We're racking them up.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
What Matt was saying is though very, very like it's very true, and it's like it dashes the hope sometimes maybe of like the people who want to see us stretch all across the country because the terrain is just so vast. I mean, the U.S. It's it's known as this very just kind of like you got every terrain that you can imagine. And so trying to like build a double rail can be difficult, but there's certain corridors that absolutely should be built. And the megapolis thing, and this is actually something I've talked with Matt about before, partly why I invited him because I remember I've spoken about kind of these large metro centers where it's like I didn't even know all the terms where you have like the main cities. Then you have like sort of the greater metro area, but then you have like a megapolis where it's like a bunch of, like, I want to say, like, is even DC to Boston considered, or is it New York? Yeah, and I'm like, wow, I wouldn't have considered that as a like one metro area, but it's dense enough. And of course, I mean, for those of us who are from the Northeast, we know these states are pretty. I mean, with the exception of New York State, these states are really small, and you can drive through very easily. Like from Maryland to Connecticut, I think I remember getting there like 6 hours, maybe even less, when I was younger. And I mean, that's like Maryland, New Jersey, New York. I mean, even Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and you're there in like 5 to 6 hours. And so being able to kind of take advantage of the fact that you already have such low landmass, it's like, why not try to have a better way to connect it? Otherwise, you drive. That's like with Boston traffic, for instance. It's like one of the worst in the country. But the good thing about Boston is that it's much smaller than a lot of these other cities. Sorry to that man who lives in Houston, this man below, and everyone else. And I'm just like, I cannot, like, same thing with LA. Like, I did go to LA, actually for the Nesbitt convention, and that was fun. But like Anaheim, really, and it was cool. But it was like, yo, I don't think I could like getting around would be so painful because you don't have very limited transit within some of these cities, and then trying to like get anywhere else out is very difficult just because of how many of these areas sprawl out. With Boston, it's not nearly as bad, but like the actual traffic is, I think what I realized, and I didn't know this beforehand, I had to look it up. I was just curious about like what people thought of Boston traffic and why did they say it's so bad. I've experienced it, but I don't live in Boston. I don't work in Boston. So I always got the fringes of it. But what I didn't know was there's only one highway going north and only one highway going east, north, south, and east, west. And I guess it's not necessarily normal for some big cities. You have multiple highways from different angles, but you have just 90, the Mass Pike, the Massachusetts Turnpike going east-west, and you have 93, which is usually what I use because I usually live more north of Boston. So I always have to come down 93 after connecting from 95 or wherever else. So it's just like, okay, this explains a lot. People are scrambling to get to the same two highways, and that's not good. I'm not saying they should like build a whole other one because already building some of these highways has caused like problems that we already have with some of these like neighborhoods and resources being divided. But it's like it's difficult when you only have so many ways to get in and out. Our highways, I don't think we like have the crazy sprawling like lanes. Some of our highways, in fact, sometimes you notice will only have 3. I've seen 2. I went to Cape Cod, down close to Martha's Vineyard this past Friday, and like some of those lanes had like 2 highways, and I was like, oh my god. It felt so painful compared to the 3 lanes, but to be honest, once you kind of got going, it wasn't like that bad. But anyway, the point is, it's just like interesting to compare a smaller city like Boston or DC. I don't exactly know the landmass, but I know DC is very, very small. And they're both more, I would say, walkable cities. And I would say the transit's not too bad within those cities. But then when you're trying to get in and around, there's just so much traffic. So driving is like very unfeasible. So, I mean, it's not impossible. Obviously, people do it. But to go such a short distance, it is like so aggravating when you're trying to drive through these cities and around versus if you could more easily kind of take, like if you're trying to, for instance, go to like New York. I mean, driving in and out of New York is also not a fun time. Thankfully, I've never done it, though one day I probably will have to. But if you had a more kind of accessible corridor, like you have buses, you have, which is still basically driving, and then you have Amtrak, which I've heard very hit or miss things about. But I do think that would be great, like if somehow that project like that would get started. What I will say though is that it might not be the most politically. There might not be as much appetite for like such a large multi-state project, especially when you already have these very affluent areas, and it's like you're spending a lot of money to connect these areas and make it more efficient, which would be great for a lot of people. But then for others, it's like, is this really what we should spend on? And I think that's another big thing when it comes to transportation considerations, like rebuilding of certain things. I mean, I don't know what decisions went into like the tunnels, like for instance in Boston, the Sumner Tunnel and all these tunnels when you're going through the airport or wherever, and how much money that cost and what good did that do. But to start a new project, you really have to have that consideration, and then resources that are already split elsewhere. So
True. And I mean, and Toby, to your point, um, the interesting thing about just the historical part of transportation, trains were the popular mode of transportation before cars got popularized. So the irony here, especially in the Northeast and a lot of the Eastern Coast, rail already existed and was popularly and densely used before the invention of the highway. So now, whereas in the West or maybe in the Midwest where I'm at, the question is how do we implement rail in a very densely cemented and asphalted landscape? For the question for y'all in the Northeast is how do we bring back rail, or how do we bring back maybe a more efficient, a more high speed rail? And kind of segueing into Amsterdam in Europe, the way you start it, or the way it has historically started, is you start local. So you honestly take a system like the New York subway, and then you say, okay, let's go a little further, right? Let's start a daily to Albany, a daily to New Haven, a daily to Hartford, and you start expanding into a regional rail. And then
Mhm.
you start saying, well, can I improve the times on that? Or let's say, if I improve the technology, can I then go further? So then you can start asking yourself, okay, is it feasible to do New York to Montreal high speed rail in 45 minutes instead of the usual 3 hours? And that's how you start, or that's at least that's how Europe progressed in the high speed rail project, or historically. To answer uh, Rocky's question, the Dutch are weird, man. Just it's they've always been the redheaded stepchild of just European standards. But also, I guess the historical or the cultural context is because of the humidity and because of them being always possibly underwater at any given moment. Cars and trains never really worked. Steel got rusted very quickly. uh, Early on, tires for rubber and everything um, was tough for a larger vehicle than two tires, and was tough to maintain because of the heat, the humidity, and the different aspects. So, and also you got to remember Amsterdam with the canals, and again, very dense, small metropolis, and you don't want to walk everywhere. So when the bicycle became popular, I want to say 1815, 1820, it just it became a perfect place because you don't have to travel a long distance. You get anywhere you want on a bike within 25 minutes, 30 minutes max on a
Mhm.
bike in Amsterdam. And a lot of these streets only had to make the accommodation from horse and buggy to car. Rail was always on the outside, the outskirts of the city. So there wasn't that much of a infrastructure change within Amsterdam in order to justify a lot of these street changes. And ironically, also, if you look at the streets in Amsterdam, cars have to go over the sidewalk. It's not the other way around. So the sidewalk stays the same height, though cars have to drive over it in order to get to the street.
Hmm. That's
So yeah.
interesting. That's
Yeah,
very
and
interesting.
yeah, and in general, most European cities have very narrow roads and a lot of gridlock just because of the history. Those cities are much older than American cities. They didn't accommodate space for cars and parking. So like nowadays, there's with all that those narrow roads, there's awful gridlock. So there are actually some European cities where they restrict or they charge you a fee if you want to go into a certain part of the city with your car. So it's cheaper, faster, easier to just use a bike. Copenhagen, Denmark is the most bikeable city, and Amsterdam is not too far from there. So I'm not sure if they took notes from them or developed that system. But yeah, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, those are like the top tier bikeable cities. But a lot of Europe is pretty bikeable as well.
Another good European example is also Barcelona, where you take the Roman grid system of the city, right, where streets are one way, and you can only turn left or right or go forward, and by doing a U-turn, you're basically just going around the block. But what they did was they said, okay, we have a grid system every 9 city blocks, so a 3x3. No cars can go inside the 3x3. You can only walk. At most, you can bike. So then now you've taken out a lot of the vehicles within the city to only drive sort of these major, more road focused roads or streets where you kind of preserve the walkability or the bikeability of the city. And they've seen decrease in emissions, increase in small businesses, increase in just flow and traffic of people. They've seen, actually, ironically, an increase in newspapers and like local radio and local information, because more people aren't on their phone anymore. They're not driving, they're not commuting, they're not listening to the radio. They're walking down the street, going to the cafe on the block kind of thing. So
Nice.
that's also kind of an interesting side effect to that. But I guess to get to Chad's question here, thoughts about housing density, that's more of a regulation question, I would say. And it's going to depend on, I mean, if we still trust democracy, it's going to depend on who you vote for. It's going to depend on who is in these city councils and what they want. What does the community want to do with the land that they have? And we can all spout multiple different examples. West Coast, Third Coast, East Coast. What have our cities done, and what's become of it? But no, it's an open-ended question, and it really just depends on, as a democracy, how do we want to see our cities turn into for the next two centuries?
No, I agree with you, Carlos, because you take my city and a Three Rivers for an example. It's a very rural city, but at the same time, it's expanding quite rapidly, and so they're always wanting to implement something new, and they're advertising more and more people to come in to live, to, like, hey, if you want to get away from the busy life of the busy city, come live here, where it's a community base. A lot of people from Chicago, they live here. A lot of people from Grand Rapids live here, from Detroit live here, even in let's say Elkhart, Mishawaka, South Bend, Indiana. They all live up here now, because a lot of those places, they're only from Three Rivers to, let's say, Indiana. Depending upon what part of Indiana you want to go to, it's like about an hour drive. About an hour drive. And especially like from Three Rivers to Mishawaka, again, it's an hour drive. If you want to take it from Three Rivers to South Bend, which is literally the next city over from Mishawaka, you're looking about an hour and a half, 2 hours at most. And a lot of times you could take the back road to get there. So it's very convenient to pretty much where am I talking about? Oh, talking about in Michigan. I'm talking about in Michigan. So there's a small rural city called Three Rivers, Michigan. That's where I live. And that city, you can go from, well, it takes me, I tend to drive fast anyways. It takes me at most, if I want to get to Chicago, it takes me about 2.5, 3 hours to get from Three Rivers to Chicago. And that's me driving about 75, 80-ish, respectfully. 75, 80-ish respectfully. Now, if I wanted to go to Indiana, that's a shorter distance because the two major cities, Elkhart and Mishawaka, that's like really close by. That's like from Three Rivers to Mishawaka. No, from Three Rivers to Elkhart. That's like a 45-minute drive. That's nothing. That's nothing. From Three Rivers to Mishawaka, Indiana, that's like about an hour. But then again, that's taking the back roads, and that's me doing 55, 60 miles an hour. So, and again, relative to the speed limit, it doesn't take me that long to get there. From Three Rivers, let's say if I wanted to go to Detroit, again, respectfully, keeping it between 75 and 80, takes me about 2.5 hours to get there. Minus getting through construction and all the good stuff, about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. If I wanted to go from Three Rivers to Grand Rapids, that's about an hour. So right then and there, I kind of live in an area where it's relatively small, but at the same time, it's steadily getting bigger because a lot of the people who are on, again, the seats for city council, for commissioner, they're older. But at the same time, they get into the point where they're getting ready to retire. They want somebody else to step in and take control. And so now you got a lot of these young cats coming in, filling those positions. And like, hey, we should open up. We should invite more people to come in. We have the land for people that want to buy a house or build a house. We have the land for it. We have these homes that have been built from like the 1950s, 1960s that are outdated. They can get torn down and get built back up so that they can be in code. And, you got a lot of people who have a lot of resources to hand out. Like, hey, if you want to do this, well, here you go. We have the resources here for you to do so. So it's like I tell people, like, there's a lot of money in Three Rivers. You just got to know where to get it and who has it. And once you connect those pieces of the puzzle together, I mean, you could pretty much set up a nice life for your family, especially if you're trying to get away from the hustle bustle of the big city. And so that's one point. And then for zoning, and I kind of talked about this too as well, because I just pulled up my city zoning stuff as well. For zoning, I would say to look at the zoning law and see what needs to be updated if it hasn't been done so anyways, because a lot of people, they surprisingly are transitioning. Yeah, oh yeah, there's Three Rivers in the city. Yes, there's Three Rivers. You're gonna at least run into at least one. As soon as you come in, you're going to run into at least one. And then depending upon what part of the city that you live in, you're going to run it across one or two of them at any point in given time. With the main river, the St. Joseph River, is pretty much the main one that flows through town. It's the main one that flows through town. And then you got the Portage River that comes in, flows into the St. Joe. And then you got a smaller one, the Rocky River, that flows into the St. Joseph River as well. So I think downtown, that's where all three of the rivers meet into one. But at the same time, when they meet in, it turns into the St. Joseph River. And the St. Joseph River runs from, let's see, up north. I think it's like, there's a city northeast of here. I think it starts there. I almost want to say it's not Mendon. There's another city past Mendon. I almost want to say Charlotte. There's a city called Charlotte, Michigan. It starts there, snakes its way down, and it actually ends up in Indiana. Where it ends in Indiana, I have no idea. But it's the St. Joseph River. It's fairly big. It's fairly big. And so going back when it comes to zoning, again, check the zoning laws and see if it needs to be updated. And a lot of times you'll be surprised. A lot of the land that you want to purchase or you want to buy, or you just even look at, a lot of the the deeds that are attached to them have been made back in 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, and hasn't been updated since then. And even then, with the zoning law itself, when it contains to that parcel of the land, again, a lot of times it hasn't been updated since that time frame. And so it almost pushes somebody to run for the office of the zoning committee and be a zoning commissioner and be like, hey, we need to update this to fit the 21st century, to fit the modern family as of right now, because a lot of people, they're actually transitioning from the stick built homes to actually buying modular homes and doing things that way, or even a factory built home and doing it that way. So it's like we kind of have to update those. And so it does give people more options, and it gives more people a little bit more of a variety, if you would, depending upon what area you live in. And so, like I said, for me in my area, it's very old, but at the same time, it does need a facelift, a huge facelift. And even then, I would say for your guys' respective areas, look at the zoning laws and look at what's entailed into it and see when was the last time it's been updated. You can talk to anybody on the city council, even go to the city clerk and even ask them yourself, when was the last time this has been updated? And if I wanted to build A, B, C, and D, can I do it based upon the code that we have on file? They should be able to give you a yes or no answer. Let's see. Who wants to go? Somebody's about to go?
No, I was just kind of digesting and thinking, like, really looking and like reading the different zoning codes. Like, it's just something so far removed, especially because, like I said, I'd be so transient that I'm like, wait, who's even like, most of the places I live don't have mayors, for instance. There's no mayor, there's like no city council. You might have like some kind of town board. I don't even know what you call it, some administrative office, town clerk. So I'm just like, man, like to like go into like city of this. Technically, where I live, it says city of this, but I'm pretty sure we don't have a mayor. And so it's an important thing, but it's something that a lot of people don't think about, to like look at your local sort of like city government and seeing like what are various, zone or deeds, like deeds. That's something that's completely way out of my league, but it's like out of my purview. Like that's something that I see in like I think of deed and I think of like some kind of old school, 1800 cowboy Western expansion. I don't know, like, but it's like no, like these things are really here and in real time. And the one interesting thing is, it's something that I kind of heard. It was an Uber driver I had going from Boston, not even to Woburn. I was going from a part of Boston, like one of the majority black areas, Dorchester, to near Fenway, because I was going to a concert and it was right by the Fenway ballpark where the Red Sox play. And so we were chatting up. Turns out, like, just after talking, he's like, yeah, I basically live this way, I live this way. And I was like, wait, because I think he said he lived in one town, but turns out he actually lived in my complex. I think he said he moved out. He was moving out later that month in June. So I never saw him at the complex, but it was like, wow, you're my neighbor. No way. You're in this building. I'm like, I'm in the next building. What? But he was saying basically this complex is built. It's a very nice complex. And, well, besides the issues that I've discussed to some of you that have been happening in my apartment, but it's a very, like, just outside. It's very beautiful. It's, it has a lot of amenities. And technically, though, where we live is actually a neighboring town. And our zip code is, I think, because the town I'm in is Woburn, Mass. And I believe the zip code we use is also Woburn, but, like, sometimes when I've used like an automatic location, whether it's like, Uber Eats, like food delivery, it'll actually throw my location to the next town, which is called Reading, like spelled like reading a book. So Reading, I guess for whatever reason, like they made they basically took where we lived and said it was the Woburn, even though really geographically we should be elsewhere. And I think that might have been because of being able to get the benefits. He either was saying that I think actually what he said was he wanted to live in Reading, even though he basically might as well have, because he had kids and stuff, and he wanted to be able to have them in that zone so they could go to those schools, even though technically he lives closer to those schools in my complex, our complex. But just because of whatever dividing line in this complex, they don't belong to our neighboring town. And so that was something he said, and that was literally like June. That was like it was Juneteenth weekend. It was the day before Juneteenth. So it was like just a month ago. But that's not something I ever would have really noticed personally. But for those people, especially when you do have kids and you have people that you're raising, I mean, Ron, you can relate here because you have multiple children of different ages, and you have to consider where you're living, what kind of education, transportation, and all those things. But like, there's some like weird finicky games. People trying to like get into certain neighborhoods so they can access certain resources. People who've pretty sure someone like low key like that's actually a crazy story, but I think someone was arrested for sending their student to like a different school than the zone they were in, like a black woman. And so there might have been more to the story, but then like there should be like zero reason to like throw someone in jail for putting them in like a different like a neighborhood. Like they were, I think it was a school they were even technically closer to, but they were like trying to use someone else's house as their resident, and then it didn't work. But like that ends up being like a very real thing. Where like for whatever reason you could be right next door to another place, but the resources are drastically different, and so especially when it comes to the schools. Um, so,
That's true.
it's my piece to like where I live right now.
That's so true.
So
True.
here's a spicy question: should municipal taxes be placed to serve the communal and the neighborhood public services? May that be schools, municipal, all that good stuff. Because honestly, because then related to zoning, if one neighborhood pays higher taxes, has the better school, is it worth or is it fair to somebody who lives right on the dividing line and is now forced to go somewhere else that's actually further because they're in that zone?
Ooh, I gotta answer to that one. I'll let somebody else go first, but I got a good answer for that one. I got a good answer for that one. I got two examples I could bring up. I got two. Matt, Toby, you guys want to tackle it first?
I have to collect myself on that question. I don't have an answer right now yet.
Oh no, I remember. So there is a community in Long Island. So it's a majority minority community, but like the northwest corner of it is majority white, and they share the same zip code. However, that corner gets to they're in a different school district, which is actually the schools are a little farther than the actual schools for that zip code, but they're actually in a different school district despite having the same zip code. And I'm sure wealth had something to do with that.
Definitely. And while Ron comes back, I mean, I have the example right here in my neighborhood. I remember when I was still in high school, there was a debate in the neighborhood because like I mentioned, the Buffalo Bayou served as the natural boundary between the two school zones, and depending on which school district the neighborhood wanted to be a part of. I mean, they're both public school districts, but one, for obvious reasons, has more rapport or has a better, I shouldn't say better, a more affluent, what's the word I'm looking for? Like they're known for that. They're known for being slightly more affluent. And the irony was the neighborhood actually voted against it because they said, we'd rather not have people come in and buy property just to go to the school. So, but the irony now is instead of driving or having to carpool 25 minutes at most to get to high school, these students now have to drive or have to get the bus pickup and go for 45 minutes to an hour to get to high school.
Nah, that's crazy.
I mean,
Like,
it's the public systems that we operate in, right? It's understanding how these things and how these regulations actually come together and function, and then that's how we end up with these predicaments.
so let me also get your question straight too. Like, I was like gonna even like try to type it out just to kind of blast it out to all of our chat viewers. So you were kind of asking, what should municipal taxes be used to serve municipal needs or needs in that municipality? And you're talking about like schools, I guess public goods. I just want to make sure I kind of
Right, sure. So in relation to zoning, should municipal level taxes be defined by the zone that you live in? Because that's I mean, at least for Houston, I know that's the current system. I don't know if different localities around the nation have different processes or different regulatory bodies. But I understand that for most of the United States, it is, the portion of your taxes that go back to the municipality go directly to your zone. Is that system worth it?
Okay, I'm back. Today is my youngest son's birthday, so we had to tell him sing him happy birthday. So two yes. So two things on, and actually this lines up right up with where Carl's point. So I grew up in the city of Grand Rapids, and there's, of course, you got what we call the hood. We got the hood schools like Ottawa Hills High School, Grand Rapids Central High School, Crescent High School, Union High School. Those are pretty much the four main public high schools that once you graduated middle school, that's what you went to. And then of course you had your private schools. You had your Grand Rapids Christian, Grand Rapids Catholic Central, and Grand Rapids West Catholic. Those are more so your private ones. So depending upon what part of Grand Rapids you live in, it pretty much dictates which high school you were supposed to go to. However, because Grand Rapids was school of choice, you could be in, let's say, Grand Rapids Central's districts, but go to Christian high school, or you could be in Christian school districts and go to Ottawa Hills, which was literally right around the corner. So you had all these things going on. The moment you crossed over, not even a block away from the middle school that I went to, you went into East Grand Rapids. And with East Grand Rapids, again, there was a higher tax bracket. The homes were a whole lot nicer. I mean, for crying out loud, the high school looked like a mini community college. That's how big it is. It looked like a mini community college. And even then, the middle school looked like it was a high school. So you kind of figure out like what's going on. And so the one area where you crossed over would be Grand Rapids, and the other one would be East Grand Rapids. And depending upon what street you lived on, that's what separated you from either attending Grand Rapids Public Schools or East Grand Rapids Public Schools. And a lot of times, a lot of the parents who lived on that divide would try to figure out how they could get their kids to go to East Grand Rapids because, of course, it was nicer. Okay. So, and again, a lot of the people had threw a fit about it, and they were like, that's not fair because, of course, with Grand Rapids being a larger city, not all the high schools got a piece of those tax dollars. So it was kind of hard to keep up because you had one high school who was doing fairly well, while another high school wasn't doing as well. and then the other ones was trying to do whatever was necessary to stay within competition. Sadly, two of the four public high schools in Grand Rapids closed, and so now the students from those two schools, they're now sent off to either you're going to Union or you're going to Ottawa Hills, or if you can't get into Ottawa Hills, then you're pretty much better off going to either Grand Rapids Christian, West Catholic, or Catholic Central if you still wanted to pretty much remain in the Grand Rapids public school system. Or if you had the choice to go to, let's say, East Grand Rapids, which is literally not even that far from the Grand Rapids city line, you could do it that way. Or you could see if your kid wants to ride the bus to go to Kelloggsville, to go to Wyoming High School, to go to Granville High School, go to all these other high schools that were still on a bus route that was still connected, you had that option to do so. And so it kind of helped out that they figured out a way to solve that issue. But at the same time, it was like it still sucked because you had multiple generations who went to either of those two high schools that had closed, but now it's like that tradition is gone. So that's
Right.
one instance. The other instance was when me and my family, we were living in Colorado Springs. The street that we lived on literally dictate what school district we were supposed to go to. And even though it was supposed to be school of choice, because of the fact the way how the district funding was set up, depending upon what part of the street that you lived on, that dictates what school you went to. So there's an elementary school literally down the street from our house that we could easily walk to. And we were trying to get our kids set up, and they asked hey, we're new here, we're new in town, we're trying to get our bears training, and we saw that the school was down here. We saw that you guys were the best school in the neighborhood. What do we got to do to get our son signed up? They're like, oh yeah, sure, we'll take them in and blah blah blah. When we got done to filling out paperwork and everything else, we thinking everything was cool and great. Principal came back and said, unfortunately, we can't take you. Why not? You're not in our district. Well, why not? We live on the same street? Yeah, you do, but because of the fact that where your street ends is another school district that you belong to, and if you lived on the other side of that street, then sure, we'll still take you. But even then, that also depends upon if we have enough space to get your son or daughter in our school. So I'm like, okay, so what school do we take him to so he can at least go to school? And so we didn't realize that there was a school like up the street, around the corner, literally, that was right there. So like, okay, it's not a bad walk, but at the same time, it's not as close as what we wanted. And so even then, we still had that same outcome of, because of where we live, that's basically where we went to. But at the same time, because of the fact that those tax dollars from the city went dispersed at all those school districts, it was like, okay, cool, great. But with Colorado Springs, with it being so huge, it has like 4-5 different school districts in one city. So I was like, why not just kind of, I guess, pull them together? But then again, it wouldn't make sense. But then again, Colorado Springs is still growing to this day anyway. So it's not even done growing. It's not even done. Let's see. Bring up Rocky's point.
Yeah.
You'll be surprised. And again, it's funny because, and again, I bring this back up because when
I actually did not know that. It is the densest state in the country, apparently. So
Yep.
can't be super.
yeah,
surprised.
I believe it. So I was in college and I was doing I was doing a informative report as far as how come certain school districts, either within the city, got less money versus the neighboring school district. And so I went and did research on that one, did a paper, and the more research I was doing, I found out that part of the money was raised up from the taxes that the city that the city made. Okay, so like, okay, cool, great. And so I'm like, well, how come District 20, the main school district in Colorado Springs, how come District 20 is getting less than District 11, but the only thing that separates District 20 and District 11 is a street? Like, why? Why is that even possible? Like, why is it even happening? And the more I was digging, it showed that in District 11, the what was it? The education at District 20 did not meet nor compare to District 11. No, District 11 didn't meet and compare with District 20. I'm sorry. It didn't meet nor compare with District 20, with District 20 leading the whole area as far as overall grades, as far as graduation rates, as far as retention goes, as far as all these other things go. So of course, naturally they got it like, okay, that's cool, that's great. Like, but why not District 11? How come District 11 is failing? How come District 11 doesn't have all this, but yet at the same time, they hold the majority of the students in the city? And so I pushed that as far as I could go to. And even then was talking to one of the state reps and I asked state rep, like, how come this is happening within the city? And like, why does it seem as though the students in this district is getting left behind the students in this district? Like, what is the actual difference? And even then, the state rep couldn't even give me a straight answer. Gave me the roundabout answer that I found on the internet. I'm like, that's crazy. Like, that shouldn't be. Like, if these kids are supposed to be getting a quality education, should that not rival the other one and force them to pretty much become better? And not only get better, but how come there's not enough funding? Case in point, the school that my son went to, the textbooks looked like as though they came from my era, like straight out from the 90s. That's how old they looked. But they were, in a sense, like hand-me-down school books. Like, why? Like, where's the funding at? Like, where's the money that supposedly we've had? And it's like, it's crazy. It's so crazy. And even it was sickening. It was sickening. However, to District 11's point, because of the fact that, of course, my son and my daughter, they stayed in District 11 up until my oldest was in the 4th grade, daughter was in the 2nd grade. When they came back to Michigan, they were actually ahead of the students in Michigan. And a lot of times, my daughter had a reading level that was in like middle school, but she was only in the 2nd grade, so she was reading above her grade. And even my son, he was still reading like above his grade. And they got to the point where, like, school is boring. Like, we're not having fun. We're not learning a whole lot. Like, a lot of the things that the kids are learning now, we've already learned like 2-3 years ago. And, we need to let push. So, talk to the teachers like, hey, can you give my kids something more because they don't feel pushed? And it's just like, ooh,
Hey.
yeah,
Yeah.
Thank you,
yeah.
just shout out.
Oh yeah. So I'll get off my little soapbox, but
No, but
I get
it's
all
valid information. I mean,
Yeah.
quite honestly, the parallel between Grand Rapids and East Grand Rapids almost reminds me of St. Louis, right? Where
Mhm.
St. Louis City is different from St. Louis County, and as soon as you cross that city-county line, forget it. Completely different city, completely different education level at the public schools. Just completely different, right?
Dale. Oh yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
again, then to Justine's point as well in the chat, you know, why is it that we've allowed these regulations, that we've allowed these systems that are supposed to serve us, that are supposed to serve our society? Why have we allowed them to get to this point of disrepair?
Yes. Something on that line too, and I didn't actually make the parallel until what you just said, Carlos. But Baltimore City, if you're familiar with Maryland, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, nothing alike. Um, Baltimore City is what people would think of when you say Baltimore. The county is just a whole lot of suburbs. And Maryland is one of the few places where, I mean, everything is run by county. So like I had to get outside of Maryland to realize you actually had like basically cities that do things like we have county police, county health department, county everything. Um, you but Baltimore is like a city that actually has its own. I think it's called an independent city. And there's a few of independent cities across the country, in other states that I can't remember. I think a lot of them are in Virginia because it's a Commonwealth and they're kind of weird with how they do their government too. But like it's so different, like the way that you have resources. I mean, Baltimore is the biggest city in Maryland, but like it's still so underfunded. I think when it comes to the actual amount of resources going into the schools, or at least like there might be a lot of funding, but it doesn't always seem to reach the students directly. And like I remember there was one fundraiser. I actually have this T-shirt where it's like giving up on your education is giving up your power. I know you definitely have seen that shirt, Carlos, with like the fist.
Oh yeah.
You've seen it too. That shirt I got because there was a Baltimore. Like it's so random. It was so hard to track down, but there was a Baltimore City teacher. I don't remember what grade she taught, but she was black woman teaching in the public schools, and it was just like GoFundMe. I mean, or it wasn't even GoFundMe, but it was like raising funds basically. And so I bought the shirt. Had no idea what happened with the school, but she basically was raising funds so they would have technology because they didn't have enough technology in the schools to serve the needs of the students. This was like 2015, 2016. So I mean, I've been out of high school since 2012, so I haven't quite seen all the new modernizations. And this is before COVID. Imagine like trying to not have the technology you need during the pandemic. But like I remember, like I kind of had to hunt down like who the person was, find like an update on it, and it was just like one teacher basically independently raising funds because their school didn't have enough. And it's just crazy how like you have this like insular city, then you have all these counties like Baltimore County. Howard County is the wealthiest county in Maryland. Montgomery County is like kind of one of the more well-known. It's like Silver Spring, which is a very, very popular area in Maryland. Rockville, Gaithersburg, very well-funded areas. And I mean, I have to be kind of careful on my numbers, but Maryland at one point had like number one or at least top 5 public school, or at least public high school or something. Now you're going to have a lot of other great elite schools, especially in the Northeast, but there's like a lot of private and boarding schools. But our public schools low-key are better than our private schools. I remember when I went to college, I learned that, which is so strange. So I always kind of had the benefit of good public education. But like, it's actually funny because where I went to college is in Baltimore County, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And I remember like a friend of mine was talking about how there was someone who's from Baltimore City. And like this guy is very, very smart, very eloquent, like really like great guy. But apparently like the reading level was just a lot lower. So like he was in college. And I mean, I didn't like have classes with him because he wasn't my major. But another friend was saying how he kind of noticed like this guy who's clearly very smart had been held back because of just like the lack of resources growing up in the Baltimore City schools. And it's just crazy how you can have that such a stark divide like that. And like, how does the funding get spread? Because property taxes are a thing I didn't know much about at all growing up. And I had no idea they were used to fund public schools until well after I was out of public schools, which I'm not going to like shade the schools that I'm in, but I could joke that just shows you what we were really learning in school. But no, like it's crazy just like that, the way that flows, because I mean, how much property tax can you actually reasonably generate, especially if it's not the highest income area? I mean, a city like Baltimore, any city, you're gonna have your crazy, crazy sky high prices, and then you have a whole lot of property that's just like you're not generating that. And should that be how you're actually generating funds to like educate versus what Rocky said, um, where you can have something flat statewide. Um, and actually, I'm just catching this comment now. Yeah, it's. I remember there's always funding cuts, and that's a big thing. And like, it's tangential the way that you talk about education with zoning and like your local districts and everything. I
Mhm.
remember my mom teaches high school, so she would teach high school, and I would hear about how there were cuts. And I mean, I've heard that in general that there are cuts like across the state, Maryland budgets. Um, you would have cuts. I mean, it was kind of crazy because the cost of, for instance, going to like universities was always increasing and other things were increasing, but then they were like cutting back on the programs, like arts, especially music. And it's like stuff like that that you really need. I mean, we might be biased because a lot of us are in tech and STEM and engineering, but like we all know that you need those kind of other outlets to be well rounded in society. And so like that's a big stunt as well, is if you're like just cutting these programs that people really need and you don't have the funding for it because of whatever mechanism is like not pulling through, then that needs to be like seriously looked at. um and again, because I've been out of public school for a while and I've never had to like really deal with that system again, there's a lot that I'm just not really aware of. But I want to definitely get more involved to kind of figure out, or what are people actually working on to try to like have more robust funding, um, for schools, have more robust run funding for teachers,
Mhm.
um, too, because that's a big thing too. Is like, um, being able to have well paid teachers and the people who are actually giving the education improves quality overall. And then there just needs to be more money in the communities as well, because most of what affects, for instance, like educational outcomes is outside of school, something like 2/3. Only 1/3 comes from the actual spending on the schools. And so there's a lot that would have to kind of be readjusted so that way you
Mhm.
actually have like a good growth and then not like decline, where unfortunately you've seen a lot of areas where everything is kind of declined population, um, like just economical centers and everything. Um, but that kind of gets to a more broader point. So I'll get off my soapbox in that case.
I mean, and to your point, Toby, right? Like, I almost wanted to mention the example of Detroit, where
Mm.
you see kind of this reluctant exodus almost, where you create this negative, like this vicious cycle of lack of resources, lack of public services, lack of good public schools, of good municipal processes and systems, which then make the housing system worse, which make everything else kind of, and unfortunately, if we continue this process of having that zone maintain itself almost through taxes, it's kind of a vicious cycle that's tough to get out of.
Mm. That is true, and this is a good point you brought up too, Carlos, because even the the downtown portion of Detroit, you can see it being built up like it's nobody's business. But the moment you start going outside of the downtown area and start going
Hmm.
into the suburbs, that's where you see again a lot of your boarded up houses, a lot of the broken down businesses, and it's because of the fact, of course, we know that the city's mayor, what was it? Was it Kirkpatrick or Fitzpatrick? One of them two. He did not handle the city's money in a way where it gave the citizens of Detroit a leg up. It didn't give those those public schools, those public services a leg up. And so with him not managing the money properly and incorrectly, a lot of the people felt the burn. And even still now, you have people who are um, protesting, do whatever it needs to be done. It's like, hey, we need to get the city back to where it should have been, not where it's supposed to be, but where it should have been. And not only that, but push it forward, because believe it or not, a lot of people are feeling left behind. And a lot of people, like you said, they're leaving because they feel as though there's no point. But at the same time, as they're leaving, you see more and more people coming in and actually building it back up to the point where now it's almost as if you got the right dollar amount, you could come in. If not, bye. See ya. You're not welcome. You're definitely not welcome. And even like the outskirts of Detroit. Go for it.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe even if not welcome, you just can't afford it.
Yep, that part. Yes, that too. That too. That too. And it's sickening. I mean, Detroit is so rich in its history and it's so rich in its culture, but at the same time, it is like you can't experience it because the people who were there, majority of them, they're no longer there. They're gone.
Yep.
They're gone. You probably got a good skeleton crew trying to keep it together, but even then, there's just not a whole lot they can do.
Yep, and I mean, I guess that's the nice part about having transplants. But then, to your point, it's also as a city, as a municipal body, you want to keep that history. You want to be able to keep that culture together, because that's what provides that identity as a community. And it's ironic enough already because, globally, the U.S. always gets criticized on its monotony. Every town has a McDonald's. Every town is a highway town. So it's almost like we're doing ourselves a cultural disservice.
Yes.
By not supporting and by not maintaining our own processes.
Oh yeah, I agree. Oh, I agree. 100%. I agree. But right, but we got to bring this plane down and come on home.
Come on home.
Y'all don't gotta go home, but we do. We got work in the morning. We got stuff we got to get done and whatnot. But again, we appreciate you guys for stopping in. We appreciate you guys for coming in. Matter of fact, what am I doing, Toby? You're supposed to be taking us out. You're supposed to be taking us out, Toby.
You're right. Listen, it's a group effort here. But yes, it's been great. It's not y'all's fault. It's not our fault. It's not the chat's fault. It's just time. Time is on our side to be marching on. And it is 11:11. Make a wish. Hopefully, proof our zones. But we are getting out of here, and we appreciate everyone who showed up for this conversation. Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, wherever you are, chiming in and just being here. Because without you all, we don't have a stream. Well, we could have a stream, but it would just be us talking to each other. And as fun as that is, it is so much better when we have other people's input and get a nice, lively, dynamic discussion. So thank you. This closed out our month of infrastructure, and next week, we'll be in August, and we'll have a new topic, and we would love to hear from you all what potential topics we could talk about, as we have our ideas, but we also love to get your input. There's a Discord. If we haven't, it's not in the chat right now, but we can put it there. I might need your help with that one, Ron. I'll be honest. But we have a Discord. It's pinned on our Twitter account, which is McCoy.org. I know it's in the description for our YouTube and Twitch, but join the Discord if you're not in it. We talk, have fun, do shenanigans all week long, post things, have discussions, so we can take this nice conversation offline throughout the weeks. And we have an idea and feedbacks channel where we literally hear from you on what we want to talk about in the future. And so we've been looking at that and are considering everything as we continue to come up with conversations. Here's the link to the Discord. So if you're on YouTube or Twitch, you could be able to copy and paste it. I'll just put it up. But thank you all again. We're about to sign out. So any last thoughts, any last whatevers, we can take it all to the Discord as well. Thank you all, and have a good night.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Carlos, for stopping in.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Seriously.